Okay,
No.
guys, you caught me. I don't actually have a terrible towel. This is just the yellowest dish rag I could find. Trying to give you guys a little bit of support. I think you're going to need it this year. Brian, talk to me about the Steelers in 2024.
I mean, they had a pretty good year. I'm not sure why they did what they did, but they went 10-7, which is a pretty good year. I mean, in winning record, kept Tomlin's record alive as far as winning. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening this year. I think the record gets broke. Unfortunately, I hate that, but I have my opinions about the Steelers and who they picked up and the decisions that they made, and we'll get into it. So, how do you think their offense and defense did last year?
Yeah, fans of the podcast know exactly what Brian is referring to. If you're new to White Widow Sports, you might be in for a treat today when we get Brian talking about the quarterback position of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But last year, they were 12th in total defense. They gave up 327 yards per game, pretty decent number there. But they were only 23rd in offense. And this was something that had a lot to do with kind of I don't want to call it a revolving door, but a changing quarterback room. We saw Justin Fields win some games. We saw Russell Wilson win some games. I think they brought in both guys, which at the time was kind of puzzling, but they knew that Russell Wilson was the guy that they wanted to be the starter. They thought Justin Fields was going to be a high potential backup. There were a lot of Steelers fans that I know that actually preferred Fields as the starter and would have liked to have seen them retain them. But when you look at their departures, they didn't retain either one. This is going to be a new look offense in Pittsburgh this year. Russell Wilson is now a New York Giant, whereas Justin Fields is now a New York Jet. So both of the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterbacks from last year have departed for the Big Apple, or at least New Jersey, if you want to consider it that. Najee Harris, their long-term, 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons since he was drafted at Alabama. He is now a Charger, where he will be splitting reps with Omari and Hampton. And then kind of the big news is George Pickens. He was traded to Dallas. He is now a Cowboy playing with CeeDee Lamb. He will not be the wide receiver one here in Pittsburgh Steelers, but they did make some moves to bring in some talent. They made some trades, but they made one big signing. It took them a long time to make it, but Aaron Rodgers is the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025. He has since come out and said that this is going to be the final year of his career, so Brian will get his wish, even if just 1 year too late. He will hang up the cleats at the end of this and no more football for Aaron Rodgers. This is kind of his last ride. The George Pickens trade was actually in direct response to one that they had made earlier, where they brought in DK Metcalf from Seattle. If you guys have been following the series, you know that we talked about this in the Seahawks video last week. But DK Metcalf is now the unquestioned wide receiver one. They don't really have much else behind him in the way of the receiver room. So DK Metcalf is going to be a big name for them this year with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. They made another trade with the Philadelphia Eagles to bring in Darius Slay. And then the big time trade, the most recent one, is they made a big trade with the Miami Dolphins. They brought in tight end Jonnu Smith and cornerback Jalen Ramsey. So completely revamped secondary for Pittsburgh. Obviously, bringing in tight end Jonnu Smith is somebody that's very familiar to offensive coordinator Arthur Smith from his time in Atlanta. Jonnu Smith was a thorn in the side of all Kyle Pitts owners and truthers. But this is somebody that Arthur Smith was just fiending for, apparently. He said, we've got Pat Fryermuth. That's not enough. We need Jonnu Smith as well. So, before we get into the draft, I just want to get your thoughts. There's a lot to break down, a lot to talk about here as far as who's no longer a Steeler and now who's going to be playing football for the Steelers this year and moving forward.
Yep. And I was one of those Justin Field fans that wanted him to get more playing time. I do think he is a decent enough quarterback. I think they should have rode that out. Upon popular belief, I am not an Aaron Rodgers hater. I think he is a great quarterback. I think he's had an outstanding career. I do believe he will go in the Hall of Fame. However, I don't think he should have played this year. I think he should have gone out, probably even last year, when he hurt his ankle. Um, Again, I don't want to see any player get hurt like that, but I he had such a good career at Green Bay and put up outstanding numbers. And I know he did pretty good with the Jets last year. as far as numbers are concerned, but numbers don't always win football games. You know, I'll cough and say Matt Ryan. You know, uh, and people that know myself and my brother, that's always been a thing with us. Is the Matt Ryan, the Falcons quarterback, just broke unreal records. But the one thing that shadows his career is he never won a Super Bowl because it was blown. Arguably, that was blown by their defense, but also they took their foot off the gas pedal on their offense as well, and that hurt them. And again, that's coaching decision. That's not all on Matt Ryan, but you know, it's going to go down in the history books as kind of his blow up. And I really didn't want to see that with Aaron Rodgers as well. I one bad play and he's out, and then what do you have? I think it's going to hurt the Steelers. Um, I do think Aaron Rodgers and Metcalf are going to be fairly productive. Um, I don't know that you'll see the Metcalf numbers of old when he was earlier in his career with Seattle and Geno, but I do think they're going to put up some yardage. I do think it's going to be a pretty good combination, um, as long as their line can protect Aaron Rodgers and give him enough time to throw. And I just don't know that that's going to happen, especially in this conference with the Raiders and the Bengals and you know
Ravens.
I'm sorry, Ravens and Bengals. You're right. I think they're going to be just a little too much, and even with their other games, I just don't know that this offensive line is going to hold up to give Aaron Rodgers the protection that he's going to need. He's never been a mobile quarterback. He's not going to be this year. Um, so we'll see how that plays out. I want the best for him. I want to see that winning record continue. I just don't know that it's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing when you look at the moves that they make. As long as Mike Tomlin is the coach, obviously, to an extent, these guys are all professionals. They all want to win. Tanking should not be something that happens in the NFL, and I think it's done more so from a fan perspective than it does anybody in the front office and the organizations, the coaching staff, certainly the players. Nobody wants to lose. They're all competitors. Mike Tomlin is aware of this winning record streak that he has. He has never failed to produce a winning record as long as he's been the head coach of the Steelers. That's something that I would like to think he probably wants to retire with. And so the moves that they made this offseason in no longer having Najee Harris, shipping off George Pickens, signing DK Metcalf to a big deal, obviously bringing in Aaron Rodgers over a younger, more dynamic athlete in Justin Fields. All of those moves have to tell you that they think this is their formula to have a winning record this year, to not just win more games than they lose, but to go to the playoffs and basically contend for a Super Bowl. I don't think either one of us believes that the Steelers are a Super Bowl caliber team this year, but that's why they play the games. These championships are not won on podcast channels on YouTube in July and August. So, as much fun as I'm having recording this series and as much as I hope that everybody enjoys these, we don't know who's winning the Super Bowl any more than anybody else walking the street does. And they could surprise us. But I do think that DK Metcalf could be in store for the best year of his career this year with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball, because I don't think that Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson and the likes of that, I don't think that they're going to be able to take enough from his plate. I think he's going to eat all season long as he and Aaron Rodgers both remain healthy. That should be a very good tandem, because we just saw Aaron Rodgers last year and what he was able to do with not just Garrett Wilson, but also Devontae Adams. He kept both of those guys fed, and they were both like a 1A, 1B type scenario. DK Metcalf is the 1A, B, C, and D on this offense. There is nobody that's forcibly taking targets away from him at this point. Now, if you tell me they make a trade for, a Randall Cobb or something like that, somebody that Aaron Rodgers is more familiar with, okay, I could see that hurting DK Metcalf very slightly. But at this stage of the game, he is their number one guy, and I expect a big season out of him. But I also kind of like what they did with the draft. I've got 3 picks that I want to talk about that they made there. First round pick, Derek Harmon is a defensive tackle out of Oregon. How can you not love this kid and his story? Obviously, the big draft night, the heartbreaking, football fans, we like to think that we're very rough, we're rowdy, we're not very sentimental or emotional in any kind of stretch, but I mean, bringing tears to people's eyes. His mom was literally on her deathbed. He gets drafted. He makes it up to the hospital to tell her that he was a Pittsburgh Steeler. He has made it to the NFL. He has achieved his lifelong dream, which you have to know is a dream that she shared and wanted for him. And she passed away that night, the same night that he gets drafted. It's both the best and worst nights of his life, you have to suspect. And it just makes you love the guy. I want nothing but success for Derek Carmen. I liked him at Oregon. I liked him as a prospect. I'm going to love him as a pro. I know that every snap he takes is going to be for his mom to try to honor her. Just one of the great feel-good stories, and you love to see that. Fast forward to the third round, you get what I believe is the direct one-for-one Najee Harris replacement in Caleb Johnson. If anybody thought that Jalen Warren was going to take over and be the number one running back for the Steelers now that Najee Harris is going to the Chargers, you are mistaken. Because Caleb Johnson's going to be that guy. He's going to come in. Now he might have to, earn the favor of Aaron Rodgers in training camp. He's going to have to learn pass protection and earn that trust and prove that he can do it. So I think early on in the season, you might see a little bit more of Jalen Warren. But as the season progresses, Caleb Johnson's going to take more and more work, and he is going to be the starting running back for the Steelers. And the other pick that they made that I really liked was the fourth rounder, Jack Sawyer. He was an edge player for Ohio State. There was a lot of times where he was being mentioned as a first or second round pick. Granted, it was later first, early second. But for him to fall to the fourth, really at no fault of his own, I don't think he has a lot of holes as a prospect. But I think what he can provide for their pass rush, just the consistency, that workman attitude has always been so big in Pittsburgh. He's going to fit in from day one, contribute, be a great part of that defense. I think him and Derek Harmon together are going to be a very good duo for Pittsburgh Steelers moving forward. But what do you think about their draft and kind of what they've added?
Yeah, I'm like you, the Harmon story, I think that touched all of us. And, the Steeler fan base is probably some of the rowdiest. We talked about it in the Browns video. A fan base is everything, I think, and Pittsburgh Steelers is no other. And, I grew up a little bit. It was a little bit before my time, but I'm still a 70s kid. The Steel Curtain. I mean, come on, that defense was nasty. Uh, you know, and Pittsburgh's always been that way. They have that fan base, that blue collar worker fan base that is just diehard to football. But yeah, I'm like you. That story brought tears in everybody's eyes. If it didn't, you might need to go get your pulse checked, uh, because that is a feel good story of the year for sure. Um, it's almost like who was it? The Bills that had that player that pretty much died on the field
Yeah.
and came back and play. I mean, how can you not pull for guys like that? Um, yeah, and I don't care who your team is. Obviously, we're Falcons fans, newly Raider fan, but I want to be a Steelers fan. I don't know. I think they're going to struggle this year. Hopefully, they improve next year. But I want to see good things from them. I don't. I think they're going to be close to that winning record. I don't know this year. It's going to be, like I said, one injury. You know, Metcalf being on the kind of tail end of his career, he did hurt a lot last year with a back injury, and we all know back injuries. They go on and on and on. They don't really ever get better. So with him being their number one, how much is he going to be targeted? Do they have other weapons to kind of take some of that pressure off him? I know Rodgers is going to want to feed him the ball, but I think they almost need another pickup to kind of take some off of him, to truly get into the playoffs and not be that number three seed in the this conference that I have them in. So I don't know. I just, like I said, we'll see. That's why these are early preseason predictions and not set in stone by any means.
Yeah, so do some quick math. I think this will be the 11th team that we've done so far in this series of videos. And this is the first time that I have listed two records for a team. Every other team, when I have my notes, it's one record. This is my prediction, and then I might comment it could be a little bit better, a little bit worse based on how certain things goes. But for the 2025 record prediction for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I have either 8-9 or 9-8. I don't
Yep.
think that they're going to be that much better. I don't think they're going to be that much worse. I think you're getting one of those two things, and it might even come down to they're 8-8 going into the final week of the season, and that win or lose game is going to make the determination of if Mike Tomlin's winning record streak stays alive or if they have a losing record under Tomlin for the first thing. The big thing that I think hurts them is I believe it was Will Howard that they drafted late in the draft as the QB3 this year. I don't think anybody believes that he's the future of that franchise. What really hurts them is what happens if they are 8-9, 9-8. They finish third in their division. They miss the playoffs. Aaron Rodgers retires. And what position does that put them in for being able to address the quarterback position? There's going to be a lot of good quarterbacks in next year's draft. We've talked about them, but they want a marquee guy. They need a star to take over. They haven't really had one since Ben Roethlisberger retired, like a true pillar of the franchise. They've basically just had revolving doors and lackluster quarterback play ever since he retired. Hell, they had lackluster quarterback play before he retired because he played longer than he probably should have,
Yep.
akin to how you feel about Aaron Rodgers. I do think this is going to be the best quarterback that we've seen in a Steelers uniform since Najee Harris's rookie season when he had Ben Roethlisberger just checking it down to him so much because of how bad his arm had gotten to that point and how ineffective he was as a quarterback. So whereas I think this could be an improved Steelers offense, I don't know as far as short term success, the potential for it versus the long term gratitude that you're going to have if they don't achieve their goals, because it doesn't put them in a good position to address their big needs moving forward. I think that you're putting all your chips in on Aaron Rodgers, and if he doesn't win you a Super Bowl, then what was the point? What was it all for? If you don't have that winning record, if you don't have a trophy to show for it, and now you have a gaping hole at the quarterback position next year, now you're going to have to make a desperate move to try to address that position, and then you're going to further set yourself back. So questionable, kind of like what you said. They made some moves that you might not necessarily agree with, but it's all in the name of winning, and everybody has a chance to do just that. So going into strengths and concerns, I think the major offseason acquisitions that they've made are going to provide upgrades across the board. I do think that DK Metcalf is better than any receiver that they've had on roster since probably Deontay Johnson. I think that he is better than George Pickens, whereas it might have been worthwhile to keep George Pickens instead of trading him away and let both of these guys be thrown to by Aaron Rodgers and keep that offense more dynamic. I'm sure there was a lot that went into that decision that we don't necessarily know of, and that's okay. I think Najee Harris was consistent, but he kind of showed you what he was going to be. It was steady and consistent, but it wasn't ever going to wow you. Caleb Johnson could be better than that. Obviously the additions that they made on defense, they've got some aging pieces, some Cam Hayward type players that are going to be on the back half of their career. And then you look at the trades that they bring in, the Jalen Ramseys, the Darius Lee. They are trying to compete this year, and they have upgraded a lot of positions, and they could be better than what we think they are. It's just going to depend on health and certainly the gelling, the egos and stuff. How productive can they be for just one season? Can they get that perfect storm? But their biggest concern is the division themselves. They are playing in a tough division. We've talked about the Bengals already. Tomorrow, you will see us talk about the Baltimore Ravens, who I think we all think is not only going to win this division, but could be a very deep playoff running team. And we'll get to that at the end of this series when we make our playoff predictions, how far we think each team is going to go. But I think just the division alone could keep them out of the playoff picture. We saw this last year with the Cincinnati Bengals. They were a winning team. They had a winning record. They still did not make it into the wild card portion of the playoffs because I believe the Steelers did. And so the Steelers and Ravens kept the Bengals out. And that could be the concern for the Steelers is they could get supplanted by the Bengals, be on the outside looking in, and all these moves they made this offseason could be all for nothing. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you. They're kinda like Atlanta, just good enough. And when I say that, they did like 2024, they produced a winning record. They did make it to the playoffs, but they didn't have any real like high end draft picks. And I think that's you're gonna see that similar this year. I wouldn't be surprised to see him with 7 wins at the end of the year. I also wouldn't be surprised to see him, with the same record that they ended with 2024 with a 10-7. So they're just gonna be that middle of the road team. With saying that, obviously you're gonna need a quarterback next year. This Aaron Rodgers already said it's a 1 year deal. I'm kind of done. So you're going to need a quarterback. Well, that middle of the road mentality is going to keep you from getting one of those top end quarterbacks that are going to come out next year in the 2026 draft. You know, unless you trade up or you make some very very bold moves to get up into that top 5 pick kind of error. So I don't know. The Steelers are going. Again, I think we've said it about a bunch of these teams that we've talked about already. They're in that weird spot. Uh, you know, they could be okay. They could be a little less than okay. I don't see them being bad, um, which is good for Steelers fans. But I also don't see them being great like in years past, which is not good for Steelers fans. So you know, I think they're gonna have games. They're gonna have a lot to cheer about. They're gonna like all Steelers fans, they are that tough, rowdy bunch. They've got big chins. They can take that little lick on the chin. They're not gonna get knocked out. But I don't see their team being that. Yes, we are that Super Bowl team of years past. You know, with the Terry Bradshaws and the Roethlisbergers and those teams, which were great. I don't see that this year. So
Yeah,
it's
and I think to
unfortunate.
me, mediocrity is the enemy of a team that has no light at the end of the tunnel. And I
Yeah,
think that's going to be a problem for the Steelers fans is if they are middle of the road. Look at what happened in last year's draft with the quarterback positions. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., JJ McCarthy. All of those guys were top 12 picks in the draft. If you finish 8-9, 9-8, and miss the playoffs, you are not going to be a top 12 picking team. So
yeah,
you are now going to have to be in a trade up scenario to try to land yourself into that realm of being able to get a top 6 quarterback in the draft class if it works out that way. And next year could look very similar. We talked about it in previous videos. You've got Drew Aller, you've got Garrett Nussmeyer, there. Lenora Sellers from South Carolina is the name that I'm really paying attention to. Obviously Arch Manning, if he comes out, is going to be the crown jewel of this draft class. There are going to be a lot of draft worthy quarterbacks in this class. It's going to be a good class for quarterbacks if you need one. But are they going to have to make a move up to get one? Or are they going to say, well, we'll just take a risk on one of them falling to us and then they end up taking a Carson Beck? And then at that
yeah,
point, is Carson Beck representing a sizable enough upgrade over what you've already had to actually change the fortunes of the franchise? You're almost better off taking a year to suck and getting an Arch Manning in the following year if he doesn't come out, and then letting that be the guy that runs your franchise if you can do that. But it's like Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh community, they don't have it in their mentality. It's not in their
yeah,
DNA to purposefully suck for a year. Mike Tomlin has literally made a career out of winning every single year. And that's going to keep him from getting that top shelf quarterback talent as we understand it. But who knows? It's going to be interesting to see.
yep.
But that being said, going into fantasy, who would you take from the Steelers on your fantasy teams? Is there any name beside the obvious or what?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of torn. I like DK. He's a great receiver. Has been a very productive receiver. Uh, with that being said, he also, again, you look back at the injuries and kind of what he did last year with Seattle. So he's kind of he's almost a hard sell. There's so many, we talked about it in the last video with the Bengals and the weaponry that they have and the top level offensive players, I almost rather, I'm going to go after that, obviously, with my fantasy team over a Metcalf. Now, do do I put him on my bench? Maybe. Aaron Rodgers, I'm gonna hard pass on that for sure. Um,
You
Caleb
not
John,
wanting Aaron Rodgers, I don't believe it.
uh, Johnson, that's again, I might put it on my bench for that off week where I need a running back, but that's not going to be my prayer. I gotta have it right now. That's not going to be in my first 5 rounds for sure.
Yeah, and obviously we haven't gotten too deep into ADP and stuff like that. I don't think you would have to take him that early, especially with Jalen Warren there. He's somebody that I think is going to have to establish his role, and it won't take him that long to get there. But like I said, Caleb Johnson, not somebody that I would shy away from having as a depth piece, somebody that can get stronger as you go along. We know that the running back position has a lot of attrition over the course of the season. Injuries happen, bye weeks happen. Caleb Johnson could come in and give you steady production. He is going to be a touchdown threat. I think he is their day one short yardage goal line back over somebody like Jalen Warren. PPR leagues, he's going to be bumped down a few more spots because he's not going to get the same pass catching work that Jalen Warren will get. But assuming he can come in and earn his role, I think he could be worthwhile. But it's DK Metcalf as far as fantasy pieces that are truly going to matter over the course of the season. DK Metcalf might be, if you showed me rankings, he might be the lowest ranked wide receiver that I feel comfortable with having as my wide receiver one on my fantasy team. If you start looking at builds where you're saying, hey, I'm going to start off first 2 rounds, I'm taking dynamic running backs. I'm starting off my team with a Saquon Barkley and an Ashton Genty or Christian McCaffrey, or however you can make that work. I want a Bijan, I want a Gibbs, any combination of those backs. And then in the 3rd round, I see that, Trey McBride is on the board, so I get my tight end. Then I go, Jaden Daniels was available, Lamar Jackson was available. I go and get my quarterback. Now I'm 4 rounds deep, and I don't have a wide receiver yet, but there's DK Metcalf. I'm fine taking DK Metcalf because, I might be weak at receiver compared to some of the other teams in the league, in my fantasy league, but I've built up talent at so many other positions that DK Metcalf is going to keep me afloat at wide receiver purely on a target share basis.
Yep, I agree. Like I said, you got to go back to the injury prone though, and kind of does that hurt? Is he going to be there week in and week out? And that may hurt you. I do believe in taking a running back, my RB1 in first round. However, I'm going to pick up a wide receiver more than likely in round 2, just because I know the importance of having good people at those 2 positions, at least one.
Right.
So I would see he could fall to, round 7, round 8 as okay, I've got him. I can start him in this position, but he's not he's not going to be my week in, week out wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2.
Right. Yeah. We'll see. Like I said, I think he
Yep,
could have the most productive season of his career. He's
he could.
certainly the Steeler that I'm most interested in drafting for my fantasy leagues. But we will have to see how the Steelers do this year and if that Mike Tomlin streak that we've talked so much about keeps intact. But guys, if you're enjoying the series, please subscribe. We've got plenty more teams on the way. We are not even halfway through this season. We're doing all 32 teams in 8 weeks, going division by division. This is our 3rd of the 4 teams in the AFC North, and we're finishing up the week tomorrow with the Baltimore Ravens. So if you enjoyed this video, please check out the others. Definitely come back tomorrow for the Ravens. Thank you guys again.